Open World Adventure Club. I'm opening it here in Auckland, and it feels like a perfect edge to lead with, to incorporate all of the ritual theatre, the full body artistry of Open World Gymnasium, the navigation tools, the mystical, the practical, the social culture jamming of social experiments in the streets. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what an adventure club means for me, with my particular experience and passions in the modern world, living in an urban setting like Auckland, and why I think it's so vital at a time when, sure, we've claimed so much land, we've got these borders and we've put flags and everything, we've got these signs painted everywhere, but I still feel there's very much a wilderness, there's an unknown. And there are old systems collapsing, whether it be financial, political, whatever else, climate, with the environment. There is still that edge of a certain pioneering space that we're stepping into, particularly in urban settings where overpopulation will continue to be a thing, and immigration and migration is such an important aspect too, in the geopolitical sphere of all the wars and all the different nations and power structures that are, always vying for control. And I'm really excited, when you look at the history of our current modern Western world, the developed nations, it has been going for around that teetering point of an empirical or an empire collapse, a time when something that seems to have always been this way, of course, this is the existing power, may actually change hands. And historically, we see that to be the case. So it's exciting. I don't think that everything will be burnt to the ground or will have to rise from the rubble and have no recollection or record of what was before. I think we've reached a technological level and a connection internationally where we can navigate these things. But there could be some very fundamental shifts, which would mean that we don't know what's going to happen with our money, or our various passports and things become irrelevant or need a huge overhaul. So there is still this frontier, there is still this bleeding edge of evolution, and it's not always necessarily progress in the sense of development and building and mining and industry and infrastructure. It can be retrospective, it can go back to ancient wisdoms, it can integrate into nature, but I don't want to be reactive in that way from an environmental activist point of view, of just going back to a slow way of living where we're all on farms and we're all just hyper-local. I think that our international connectivity and our modernization through technology is important, but actually essential to keep on path with our spiritual and cognitive and social development. I think that our technology mirrors our spiritual awakenings and evolutions, our interconnectivity, the way that we're starting to understand things like, for example, the Akashic field, right? Very similar to cloud computing. We've got these metaphors or these analogies where I think as we become more aware, or through memes we share interesting ideas and they become more familiar, whether it be something like veganism or something like equal rights, it just becomes the norm. It's like, yeah, of course that. But no, not of course that. I grew up in South Africa under apartheid. So no, not of course the modern norms. That was very clear racial distinction, which was the norm. And now a totally new norm, and of course everyone knows that, is in place. And so it's so easy to forget how far we've come. And it can also be very easy through nostalgia and rose-tinted glasses of reflection, think that things were so much better before, when people were just living on the lands, hunter-gatherers, or just small agricultural villages, or whatever it is. I think there's a reason that people wanted whatever centralized distributed electricity or some kind of protection mechanism more than a spear. There was things that we wanted to have, and we've created those things, but in a very short-sighted way. And we understand that we don't have a closed loop of production. We're very wasteful. We're very toxic to the environment. We had a lot of vested interests perverting history, rewriting history books, or manipulating medical records or financial, political things, whatever it is, to make things seem a certain way. And I think it's really important to admit that we are under a form of illusion, hypnosis, social programming, dogmatic rightnesses from different institutions, whether it be political or religious or whatever other institutions have power in society. And so in this point, I see it to go in all ways. It's going to go back, so to speak, to integrate with nature. And I'm really passionate about things like permaculture gardening and syntropic agroforestry and, you know, mycelial network and symbiotic ecosystems where you've got, you know, housing which works into and allows the environment to grow around it or through the home, much more environmentally friendly ways of filtering our water and energy, all these sort of things, like 100% on that tip. And also love tech. I'm a video game designer, and I have a game called Vicarious where I get the hive mind to plug into me through social media. Like, I love these aspects, which, as I say, are an analogy for me to our natural human, or maybe superhuman, evolution spiritually. So I want to go futuristic as well as ancient with integration, and not always be conservative, as in conservation, just keeping what we know, is a form of maintenance and protection which doesn't necessarily allow for growth. And creation has some inherent destruction in it. So things will die off and new things will be born. And this is a space that I think will be needed to be navigated with a lot of awareness, a lot of respect, but not always just trying to go back and preserve everything that was, but allow things to continue to mutate and intersperse, hybridize, as they always have, with every culture and language and various medicinal or ritual practice, every cultural identification, all of these sort of things, our storybooks, our music, our clothing, all these sort of things will continue to cross-pollinate. And I think that is actually a marker of respect as well, which is a whole other discussion about cultural appropriation. And I'm not going to try and be a proponent or a spokesperson for that solo, but I'm happy to be part of those discussions. But when it comes to an adventure club, what I'm wanting to do is to have people showing up understanding that we are in process or progress. We have not reached a plateau of perfection where we can now just go and herd up all the things from the past and protect them, but we are moving. There is going to be a state of change where we need to adapt. We need to continue to allow the power structures to fall away, whether they be the modern political structures or the ancient indigenous structures. These things are going to continue to bump in this combustion chamber of evolution with each other. And so an adventure club for me is about admitting that we are still in that bubbling, frothing petri dish of interaction, and it will continue to be so. It's not trying to impose any rightness on a particular track other than curiosity, participation, integration, truth through scientific observation, softening of our cultural and religious rightnesses, our moral hierarchies, the human-centric approach as well, just really relaxing that patriarchal idea that we're at the center of it, or that, you know, we own God in this particular building or in this particular ritual, softening our position in the food chain, realizing that we are nature and we're in amongst this ecosystem, and realizing how much benefit there is to receive a vibrant, thriving ecosystem rather than taming it. I think that the colonizers' approach has been to beat things back, to sterilize, to through genocide or through domestication, make things weaker so they can be subjugated and be the subjects of our newly appointed leadership. But what sort of power is held when you reign over slaves, or you reign over an environment which is gasping for breath amongst the pavement and the toxins and the mining and all of this imposition? Sure, you're a king or a ruler over sickness and weakness and always trying to squash rebellion because people are so unhappy. So I don't have any reverence for the existing power structures. I don't have any kind of even curiosity about any of the conspiracy theories about the ruling elite and the classes, because I think, well, they don't really get it. They don't understand life. If through financial or political or medical or spiritual manipulation they want to make people weak, there's a missing piece in their doctrine. in the scriptures or in their constitutions or whatever, texts they are ruling themselves by, or the little men's secret handshake boys clubs, like they don't get it, because if they did, they would want everyone to thrive, because being a part of that, you receive so much more. It's like this idea of a wave. The surfer doesn't try and create the wave. Like imagine a little human just trying to splash up some kind of wave to then surf. That's all the self-generated, controlling, master, dominant approach. Whereas if you know that you are of nature and there are things external to us much more powerful than us, the wave will come through and we surf it. And that wave could be a thriving environment, lots of food gardens around, a really well-educated and financially stable populace. There's so much life and culture. We would have people having entrepreneurial ideas, would have people doing their passion project rather than trying to pay the rent, would have so much innovation, this amazing mixing and melting pot of both nature and humanity together. And that's what one could rule over, or at least be a part of, that natural external wave, and having humility to integrate in something beyond us. So this is a lot of the ideology behind Open World. But coming back to the Adventure Club itself, I feel like there's a story playing out. I feel like in our subconscious or superconscious, I think in our, mythologies, in our culture of our history, in our mass marketing through media and Hollywood and, our TV shows, comic books, we are telling a story. We are part of a narrative. We understand things through stories. They make much more sense to us when we watch a movie rather than going to a lecture. We can think about history, but if we actually watch a documentary or even see a painting about it, well, it really hits us on that subjective kind of emotional level that makes sense on the human scale. What does it mean for me in my day-to-day life? How does it relate to me in my relationships? What can I do to be a part of it? And so I see that we are telling a story. This particular story has many timelines and many storylines. I think some people will be going off-grid and going into nature and living sort of bare bones integrated in that way, and it's beautiful, and I encourage diversity. Other people are going much more tech focused. They're going to go into the machine, VR, AR, all these different realities, wanting to be very tech-based digital nomads, just living on their computer or in the cyber realm. Cool, like transhumanism, awesome, like let's go in that direction too. Other people will be very much business and culture and population centric, a lot of interaction in marketplaces and capitalism, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think this is really important to realize that unity doesn't look like homogenized kind of generic culture. For me, unity looks very disparate, very diverse, this array of people. And I remember a friend commenting one time in a conversation that always stuck with me, that in times of plenty, we diversify as a species. We go in opposite directions. And it's a survival characteristic, so that when the snap change happens, whether it be because of climate or finances or military or whatever, some of us will survive and some of us won't. Maybe the people in the hills will survive, or the people at ocean level. People in tech will survive, or people in nature. And it's beautiful. Like, I thank all of those people who are going to go in a direction that I don't have either time, skills, or even interest in going. And they'll geek out on that. And they will fully go into that subculture, that niche, and then they will make it thrive. And they might be the ones who carry our species forward, or they might be the ones that go extinct and die off. And so realizing that unity looks like being around others who have very different lifestyles or opinions to you, or at least making space for them to be so. I think that there's lots of divides politically and medically with the virus and all those sort of things, where we want there to be this general unified approach. But I think it's really important. This is just a case study of a time when we need to make space for differing opinions, because there's different sides of the lines, and everyone ultimately just wants safety and autonomy. They want to be able to live their own lives, but there's this idea of, well, if you live your style, that's going to impose on my choice. So I think it's a really interesting conversation, particularly around urban planning and social divides, is how we want unity but not homogeny. We want individuality without isolation. That's a really interesting balancing point. So back to Adventure Club. Adventure Club is saying that we are telling a story, I believe, even if we don't know it. we are going in the direction of this diversification. We're going in the direction of some people going really nature-based and organic and living off the land, other people going into this technocratic future where everything's like 5G, plugged in, smart city, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and there is going to be vying for power, perhaps in different ways. With blockchain, there's a real shift of that power dynamic, us going bankless. I think it's amazing, the idea of not having these, international financial institution which can manipulate things so much. Like it's exciting taking that middleman out and going directly from we as the utilizers of these services directly to people who can give it, and actually having much more agency over our own funds. So I think that's an example of another huge kind of shift that's happening. But there will be power structures. We've seen it with people like Tesla / Elon Musk, SpaceX, like Jeff Bezos, aka Amazon, and his space idea, with of course Zuckerberg, Facebook, with Google, with all these huge techno powers that someone who maybe 100 years ago would have just been a geek in a basement or just very much in academia, instead now has real functioning power equivalent to or far surpassing many nations. So because of our different economies, because of our different mindsets and our value systems and our cultural way of interacting, there's going to be different rise and fall of power structures. And there will be some malevolence as well as benevolence. There will be some power grabs. There will be some manipulation. And you know what? That's us. That's our current stage of evolution as humanity. There's going to be assholes. There's going to be someone who wants to be better than others, who wants to be destructive. Ideally, they're not going to be the ruling class, but there's going to be that continual hustling and bustling. And there's also going to be the resistance, the Jedis in the Star Wars analogy. There are that sort of hacker, maker, grassroots, activist counterpoint to that idea of centralized power. And we see that right now with literally our, techno hackers, with people like the cypherpunks in blockchain, with the environmental activists, with also in the idea of interpersonal communication and neo-tantra and all that kind of stuff. Like, there is a resistance owning the dark. People who are okay being, the black hooded or the dark wizards or the, black sheep of the family, the face tattooed subculture niche, whatever, fight club, living in a warehouse off grid, whatever it is, this is an archetype. This is part of our storyline as well. And this is the story that I see playing out. And I want us to be prepared. It's like for the zombie apocalypse, you can frame it in whichever story you want, but essentially things are going to continue to fall apart simultaneously as being built. And I personally want to show up for an adventure. That's why I'm here. I'm here for the art. I'm here for the adventure. I'm here for my sovereign path of mastery to pursue, going up the hill and sitting with the Kung Fu master and doing my work and, having insight into the esoteric. I want that sovereignty, that autonomy to do my personal thing. But I also see that I want to be part of this crew, this tribe of pioneers, these titans, these self-assured rebel wildlings who are also very heart-centered and very insightful, very intelligent. It's the straight edge rebellion of punk that I also really resonated with, where this idea of we can rebel by just getting face mashed and moshing and doing whatever we want and breaking glasses and graffiti, or we can, and not to say that I'm against graffiti at all, I love street art in an intelligent way that's not just about vandalism, that's not just about claiming my space by pissing on a wall, but instead by having highly sentient conversation, having a dialogue or proposing ideas that are counterpoint to the mass marketed kind of dulled illusion of what's easiest and most convenient. And so that involves street art, that involves pop-ups, that involves counterculture jamming, that involves protest, that involves organizing our own meetups, having online discussions, having our own agency over our privacy, understanding how to program these machines that are running society. And that's why I think the internet is such an amazing thing. It went from being the sideline novelty, in the 90s, maybe it's going to be big, actually no one's going to use the internet, into this thing on which most of our businesses and economies and and media now functions on. So, point being, we are telling this story real time. It's happening now. We are also witnessing the speeding up of change, whereby something that might have taken 200 years before might take 20 years, and soon it might take 2 years. There's this exponential growth. Culturally and financially, environmentally, we can have such impact so quickly. If we all do one particular thing, the environment can go down really quickly or up really quickly too. So things are going to continue to be quick. So I really think that there is a space to prepare for change, for the unknown. It definitely aligns with like Zen-like void meditation practices of becoming no one, which is a very big contrast to the egocentric identity of consumer capitalism, which says that we all deserve to be kings and queens, that we all deserve to have our castle on the hill and our personalized wallpaper and devices and I own everything. And becoming no one, for me, is about being post self-help, not being so self-obsessed. And I'm not saying that self-help is narcissistic. Like, it's important to be aware of our personal traits, but we can be so obsessed with cultivating the garden of I that we forget that little garden bed, if we lift the borders, actually feeds out into the field and to the jungle. And there's actually, I think there's a huge cure in that. I'm sure you've experienced it in times of emergency or something of great importance or reverence comes into your field, and you're like, I just drop my problem, I stand up and I help in that regard. Mothers lifting cars off babies, or if there's a fire, or you might talk to strangers in a lift when you get stuck, when you don't usually do that. It lifts up beyond ourselves. And so that's a key part of what I am working with in my particular modality, is these Zen warrior hacker activist art monks. I call them art marshals. These people who are holders of the flame of creativity, but approach the creative arts with a monastic, or at least a martial arts like discipline. And this for me is such an exciting thing to be a part of, particularly in a modern age when there's mediocrity and there's domesticity and there's insulation and everything just feels so convenient, served on a plate, put it in the microwave, just rip off the plastic packet and it's pre-done. There's an essential part of our humanity and our wilderness which is being neglected. And a really key part of our initiations into our, some water, into our eldership, maybe. I think that we as a species, humanity, is still in our adolescence. That's how it feels. That's what I'm getting from our responses. And I miss the idea of elders that I could respect, of nobility, of leaders that I could look up to for wisdom, of a great, humble, insightful guidance. And so we're missing that because things are so easy. And it's not just about stepping into your manhood by going and hunting. There's also female or any kind of cross-gendered initiations just into humanity that we as a culture are no longer providing space for. And this is a big part of the ancient indigenous work as well, these rites of passages, these initiations, going on pilgrimages, going on vision quests, all these kind of things. There's so much to learn that we've been just being cynical of or drowning out in the whitewash of modern society. And I also believe that there's futuristic, developed ways of enhancing that or enabling in a more tangible way the connections. A lot of meditation and ritual is about tapping into something that is beyond the physical, talking to spirit guides or connecting in the dream space. And now we can facilitate that through the Internet of Things, getting direct readings from nature, learning the language of plants and animals, actually talking to each other in the dream space of cyberspace, all these sort of things. So we can actually continue, enhance, and I'm not against popularization as well. I know that there's a lot of voices against things like the popularity of yoga and things like that. But there have been those rebel gurus or those rebel custodians and holders of wisdom that actually wanted to share it beyond the little initiated groups. And I believe that is love as well. And for sure, there will be hardcore, geek devoted approaches to the different modalities who want to go away and learn the deep wisdoms of these things and maybe have a more pure orthodox approach to these things. But I also believe in the popularization of environmentalism, of spirituality, of mutual respect and equality. All of these things. It's so nice that there are memes about these things, that they're kind of understood. Like the idea of, oh, I'm triggered. That only came into our usual lexicon of reference, the words that we use, the symbols that we use in the last decade or so. And then it was just everywhere. I'm so triggered. But that popularized the concept of our subconscious having these things below our awareness, which can then be stirred by or triggered by a particular event, and we're acting from that bank of information rather than our real conscious intention and personality. Like, that's massive. That sort of popularization of psychology is really useful. So I'm all for the popularization of any kind of body of knowledge or practice which is going to be beneficial to humankind. So that's where the Adventure Club sits, is the idea of let's look with a new scope into this modern world and remember the wilderness of the lands rolling under it. Feel the vibrant ecosystems that are waiting to grow through the cracks. Understand the layer of human story. Like, you look at the buildings and it can seem very intimidating to approach a city, but a city is just made up of people. Remember the individual, the personal, the intimate interactions of chatting to someone on an escalator, or brushing past someone at a concert, or helping someone up the stairs. Like, that is the scale that makes more sense of being part of a city. It's actually just people. And when we start to go on expeditions in the Adventure Club, we do this kind of like city surfing, this social engineering, the social experiment. And social engineering can have a manipulative connotation, but it's understanding the mechanics of how people work. When they walk into a space, when they see the particular signage. And when you start to understand that, we're also more aware of how we are being programmed. You might see the language in a magazine article or on a billboard, and you go, oh wow, this is affecting how I interpret this whole space. And you can also predict things, therefore. And you can also be aware of the way we can be manipulated through media, stirred into a frenzy, mob mentality, fear reaction. These things become apparent when you start to get on the ground and start to play test how to move through a space. How space itself changes how people move. How lighting, smell, sound, these things all affect behavior. So to summarize now and bring it to a point of what it's like to engage in this, like hopefully you've been tracking with all this, it sounds exciting and it sounds like something that's needed and useful in this time of change to be an adventure club. And so what it means is that we meet several times a week. I'm also happy to do online training and give you access to the stuff online as well. But essentially we'll be meeting with a few different focuses. The first one is to go on these expeditions. So the first kind of expedition is in the urban environment. You could call it urban exploration, culture jamming. And then there's also the nature hikes, the nature immersions, elemental immersions, hiking, swimming in cold water, doing earth burials, camping, and tuning into our senses as we feel into the instincts away from all of the white noise, the backwash of being in an overly stimulating environment, and just feeling that shifting of our nervous system back into rest and digest, and opening. We don't have to be so defensive, opening to the subtle conversations that happen in nature. So those are the two types of expeditions that we'll do every single week. Then there's also the conditioning in open world gymnasium. So that's physical conditioning, but also mental conditioning. So doing moving meditations, stoic endurance, slow practices, doing play fighting, general fitness, any of these ways that attune our tool of self and awareness and senses. Could be blindfold walking, all these kind of things. And that way we cultivate a self that can show up to all of these different environments. And that's a big part for me of dealing with the unknown, is that when you trust yourself, you don't always have to be able to predict, which I really like, because when we don't have to predict, we don't have to control as much. If I need to predict everything that's going to happen, I'm going to want to control and squash any potential wild cards, because, well, I don't know what's going to happen if that dog runs across, or the child comes, or this crazy person does something I can't predict. I'm going to want to get rid of them so I can really control the outcome. But if I instead trust myself in any environment, I'm less needing to impose myself on the environment and more interested in showing up, because I've got my tools. I can be cold or hot, I can be hungry or full, I can be in pain or in pleasure. I trust this instrument of my body, and therefore I'm more open to all the different variations of what will happen external to myself. And then beyond that, there's also the navigation tools. So I'm interested in developing tech tools, but also simple pen and paper compasses and card decks and life mapping, different ways to go on a quest. And I really like this idea Elizabeth Gilbert calls the physics of the quest. It's like this mental state, and we can get into manifestation magic and some sort of esoteric concepts, maybe a bit new age, but the idea of setting an intention and that affecting the experience we have. So you might walk down a road in one state and it just seems like a normal road, and you walk down the same road with a different perspective, and all of a sudden it comes to life with magic, and there's characters in the strangers that you meet, and there's symbols coming through the signage, and that's called the physics of the quest, which essentially means that our mind, being the amazing pattern recognition machine that it is, will start to pull out the relevant parts of information. And just about being intentional. I'm sure it's very familiar to many of you to go into a space like that. You can go into ritual like that, but you can also just go into day-to-day life like that as well. So these are the navigation tools. It's sitting back, doing some life mapping, creating some kind of systems for yourself, looking at maybe natural systems, looking at astrology, looking at the wheel of co-creation, looking at what I've got here, the Book of Changes, Taoism, Zen, whatever you like to look at, the different systems of understanding life, and then working out how we can use those to step into chaos, to step into play, into spontaneity, like a contact improv dance with life. How can we meet it? And for me, that is the only way to keep up with evolution, is to meet it and to be changeable and to change, and to have some kind of tool to do that is extremely grounding. So at least it's an entry point, even if it just gets you taking your first step, and then you have interactions and experiences with people, and you've got to let go all of your plans. That's beautiful, but having these tools can be a good way to at least get you started on your quest and enjoying the experience of the adventure of your life. So that's what we're doing in Adventure Club. Just to reiterate, we're going on expeditions in the city and in nature. We're conditioning our body as a physical instrument to engage in the adventure, and we're crafting navigation tools to start us off and give us some direction in the chaos of possibilities that are out there. So if that sounds interesting to you, please reach out. Please support the creation of this Adventure Club. There's just a small, passionate group of us here in Auckland who are doing this. We've got a physical space. We're building an outdoor gymnasium. We're going out on these expeditions every week, going on hikes and starting to do more of the city-based stuff as well. So any way that you can support, get involved, will be hugely appreciated. If you want to come and help build the gym and the sweat lodge and all those sort of things, we're doing ice baths as well, elemental immersion. Please come, get involved, spread the word, connect us up with groups or community organizations that might want to help, or just simply reach out and ask me about it, because I think the more minds that hold this vision, the more real it's going to be. So I'm really, really excited. Hopefully this has been, it's a rather in-depth, detailed discussion, but an intro for those who are interested in the ideas behind Adventure Club, but hopefully some practical details as well that make sense of what we're actually going to be doing. And I'll be sharing that here on social media. I've also got the Human Avatar as an account on Twitch, so I'll be doing more Twitch streams of live experiences that are going out there, and just get involved, and hopefully we will all live our art and play our lives and realize that even though we live in a modern world, there's still so much exploration and adventure to be had. Big love, and thank you for playing.